Good morning, everyone. Today is the second day of our conference. The title of today's session is Supply Chain Disruptions Navigating Economic Recovery in a Fragile World. So the speakers for today's session are David Morris, Mamun Rashid, Simon Coffey, Christian Zalewski. So I'm requesting all the speakers to take your seats. Thank you. So for today's session, our moderator is Christian Zalewski. So over to you.
Thank you very much for this kind introduction, and I'm very happy to be here in Dhaka. And I would like to also congratulate the organizers for putting together such an important event. Now, as we are in one world, one village, and we have pretty much the same challenges, and one of them being the disruptions in supply chains. That was in the story of the last 5 years. It's basically the history of disruption. First, we have the terrible experience of COVID pandemics and disruptions in supply chains connected to the lockdowns. I know, and I heard over the last 2 days, how difficult this experience was for Bangladesh and for its industry connected to the world economy via various links. And these links were basically broken or being much impacted by this lockdowns and pandemics. Then we have the war in Ukraine, which basically provided us with another wave of disruptions and international sanctions. And of course now we are in the very fragile process of rebuilding and reshaping the links within global economy. So I think that's why it's so important to basically think about the supply chain and what is our experience of the last 5 years and what can we make to have a more stable and predictable environment for economy and industry, because for every business its supply chain is key for success. So let me very briefly introduce our speakers. Mr. David Morris is a distinguished global authority on international business risks and opportunities with a wealth of experience on diplomacy, business, and cultural exchange. David has served as a senior advisor to governments, businesses, and international organizations, including the United Nations, where he currently serves as vice chair of the UN Sustainable Business Network for Asia Pacific. David Morris is CEO of Australia-China Business Council. Please join me in welcoming him on stage. And it's my pleasure to introduce Professor Mamun Rashid. Here in Bangladesh, he's a very well-known person and highly respected leader with unparalleled experience in wholesale banking, corporate restructuring, and risk management. And over his distinguished career, Mr. Rashid has conducted micro audits and portfolio reviews across Asia, Europe, and Africa, while spearheading technology and financial transformations. He has also authored 15 insightful books and shared his knowledge as a business educator over 20 years. Please join me in welcoming Professor Mamun Rashid. And last but not least, Mr. Simon Coffey is a seasoned shipping management business analyst with the World Health Organization's Global Service Center in Malaysia. Simon brings with him over 15 years of invaluable experience across top global companies and UN agencies. His expertise spans a wide range of disciplines, including finance, procurement, logistics, supply chain management and innovation. Please welcome with me Mr. Simon Chetty. So let us start maybe with Professor Mamun Rashid. As I said before, and as you all know, we have had pretty rough 5 years with global supply chains. So what do you think are the major supply chain challenges now, and what kind of solutions would you like to propose to address them?
Thank you so much. Once again, good morning to all of you, especially the visiting guests. Welcome to Bangladesh. And thank you so much, Mr. Deski, for giving a fantastic introduction as well as the pathways for our discussion today. You know, having managed cross-border trade for almost 30 plus years here in Bangladesh as well as in Europe, Africa, and Asia. So I would say that every day is a kind of new day for supply chain world. And you see, Mr. Delisky has rightly mentioned about very challenging 5 years. So he must have remembered, of course, Russia-Ukraine war. He has mentioned about the Middle East tension. We know about the COVID, and COVID has taught us, you see, not only transport planning, also safety, security, and we have seen a big trading nation, China, Shanghai port, and how they have struggled a lot. How did Dubai and some of the countries who decided to remain open for trade, cross-border trade, they did a lot of benefit out of this, though also casualty, and there also safety and security became a major kind of issue. And then COVID has also shown us, and post-COVID as a consequence, the semiconductor shortage in the world. You know, in today's world, the chip-driven technology, these are the key kind of a decision-making influencer. So COVID shortage, and we have seen China, while China is off or aggressive, they call the shot in the world. So now, as of today, we are seeing Chinese real estate market being short or going short, or there are deficiency in investment and demand sluggishness, and that is where we are now seeing lot of Chinese bulk carrier being so free and importing from China, or has, in fact, the cost has reduced. Importing from Vietnam, even for Bangladesh, cost has reduced. Whereas, on the other hand, the importing from India, because of the high demand and cost has increased rather significantly, also because of the cartel working in Bangladesh, shipping cartel, coastal owning cartels, and feeder vessel cartel, so which we need to manage our mini trade or interim trade between Singapore mother port as well as the Chittagong port and other regional ports. So these are becoming very important, apart from, before I finish, apart from the geopolitics. We have seen when Israel was successful in throwing the missiles towards Iran using the land of Jordan. So it tells you something that yes, some kind of compromises here and there. And we have also seen Russia-Ukraine war, how it has influenced us. All the shipping tycoons were, I'm sure my colleague David will elaborate in a broader kind of way. So that has forced us to reroute. Even this Iran or Middle Eastern tension is forcing that it has forced in the past some airways like Qatar Airways to reroute, and now they are forcing the shipping lines to reroute via Cape de Hope towards Panama or Latin America, and we have seen how any tension in the Suez Canal has forced the shipping companies, and ultimately the end user of the shipping lines, those are the traders, entrepreneurs, how they have to account for larger or enhanced cost. Last but not the least, I will also try to arrest your attention towards the case crew availability. Now you see in the COVID time, we have seen most of the airlines took lot of lag period to restart their business because many airlines captains, aircraft captains, they went into hibernation during COVID because there are list of airlines flying on the sky. So, and bringing them back was a major issue, retraining them and was a major issue. And now we are seeing, while Bangladesh is also emerging as a very good trade hub and using even Bangladesh itself, Bangladeshi entrepreneurs itself, Mr. Zelensky owned more than 200 ocean-going ships because in order to smoothen their supply chain, they thought they did a very good study and review of how do we command our own supply chain to and fro Bangladesh, and they landed up with, say, getting into Whiskey Bank and Royal Bank of Scotland and others, Mr. David Morris, and to finance their ocean-going ships. So now fuel cost, semiconductor, crew availability, and now latest Dubai has stopped issuing visa for our shipping captains, ship captains. So now again, only because of the crew availability issue, most of the Bangladeshi ocean-going ships, they take on board their captains and the crews out of Dubai port, out of Singapore port and other Middle Eastern ports. So this is also very important crew availability. Last but not the least, now trucking cost in US, say for Amazon, you know how Amazon is coming up, Walmart is coming up, they have got billions of dollars of trucking cost. So trucking, then shipping, then airlifting, in the midst of all the disruption that at the very outset Mr. Zelensky has put up, so has put supply chain not only into many challenges, it will keep on putting us in the challenges in the days to come, and we must in collaboration with each other in the room and beyond all the stakeholders, we must come up with a more resilient supply chain policy for the entire globe. Thank you so much.
Thank you for outlining this need for collaboration and having variety of partnerships to address the challenges. And let me ask the same questions to David Morris. We have had a small conversation about how this looks like from the Australian perspective. Maybe we can share it now with the audience.
Well, thank you, Christoph, and thank you to the organisers. It's great to be back at the Australia Bengal conversation for the second time for me, and to see some old friends and to make new friends as well. I think Mamboon explained so well and with such in-depth expertise about what's going on at the supply chain level that I can't add to that, apart from affirm that I think that was a very, very good explanation of what's happening on the ground. What I might do, if I may, Christoph, is take a sort of a bigger picture trend approach to trying to step back and think about, well, what is really going on here? It seems to me that, and I think the theme of this conference as well, is that we're going through a process of shift in the world order again. And most of us are old enough to remember the last one. So around 1989, 1990, the world order shifted at that time. And at that time we entered into a period of what we've called globalization, or at least the most recent version of globalization. And that period of the early 1990s was a period in which most of the world embraced global supply chains, openness to trade, openness to investment. And when I say most of the world, this was a trend that I would argue was led out of East Asia The East Asian economies by the 1990s had demonstrated the success of the model of development through openness to trade, through investing in building export industries in their economies, in the East Asian case, we had very close partnerships between government and business because of the nature of those societies and those political institutions in East Asian countries. And those countries pursued very successful export-led development strategies. And at the same time, we had the lucky good fortune that at the same time the United States was embracing free trade again. The United States goes backwards and forwards in its thinking about trade. And in the 1990s, the US was going through a period of what they called the long boom. They expected in the 90s to have continuous growth and continuous openness to the world was the philosophy in the United States. And Europe as well was embracing the idea of a new idea for Europe of expanding its political institutions and also embracing globalisation. So we had this confluence of trends. All these trends came together in the 1990s to drive this new world order. Now I think all of that's breaking apart. And I think we all know that. But I think to understand the impact it's having on supply chains, we've got to think about what is causing the shift. And so that very rise of East Asia, which of course has China at the centre because of the scale of China, but it's not only China. It's all of the economies of the East Asian region, and now luckily we're seeing the growth, very successful growth, with its challenges of course, but we're seeing that growth expanding beyond East Asia here into South Asia and beyond. We are seeing a shift in power now in the world, and so the reaction in that shift of power means that the mentality, the thinking, the policy thinking in the United States and Europe is shifting. They're no longer supporting free trade. So when we talk about a restriction in the semiconductor supply, what we're actually saying is that there's been a conscious strategic decision made in the United States, which is affecting the semiconductor trade in the world. We're actually seeing a conscious decision to try and block the technological rise of China. Now, whether that can work is a decision that Washington needs to make, because that's a decision for them, whether they can succeed with that strategy. But I think those of us who live in Asia would very much doubt that you can restrict the technological rise of any of the countries of Asia. And in fact, the technological rise of Japan and of Korea and other countries has been so successful. And when we see the scale of what is happening in China, it would appear to me to be highly unlikely that the United States is going to succeed in constraining the rise of China. So we're trying to figure out, because we're in the middle of this shift, we don't know how it's going to all look at the end, or when people look back in 30 years' time, what are they going to say about this period of time? But we are in another 1989, 1990 type moment. And again, just like back then when multiple trends were happening at the same time, this time we've had COVID, and COVID, of course, was harnessed in the discourse, in the narrative. It was harnessed by President Trump at the time as being all about China, as China having caused it, which of course is an absurd proposition to most of us who would understand that these things happen. They happen about once a century, although perhaps with the changes in our world and our world population, perhaps we'll see another pandemic again within a shorter period of time, so we should be ready for it. But let me say a couple of things from my knowledge and my network. So one person in my network is John Denton, who's the Secretary General of the International Chamber of Commerce. And he and his team in Paris were looking very carefully at all of the supply chains through COVID. And halfway through COVID, he said to me, David, there's hardly any evidence of there being supply chain problems on any scale. The narrative was about massive supply chain distortions, but actually the experience with supply chains in and out of China, the world's biggest trading economy, at that point in the middle of the pandemic was very minimal disruption. And certainly that was the case between Australia and China, which is one of the biggest trading relationships, Australia being China's 5th largest trading partner, there was virtually zero impact from COVID. In the narrative, the political narrative, because remember we've got this big political shift happening, the narrative was very different. So I think we have to be careful about looking at actually what was going on. There were distortions, by the way, in some areas of trade during COVID. For example, next door in India, we saw quite a lot of restriction on medical equipment trade. But that was a political decision that the Indian government made, but it didn't affect global trade at that point. So I think I'll conclude my comments here that there's a big geopolitical shift occurring. There's a lot of narrative around impacts on supply chains. We should be very careful to wait and see just how all this plays out, because the biggest trading economy, China, at this point in time, we don't know what its view is going to be in another 5 years or 10 years, but at this point in time, China is being the world's largest trading economy, is now driving the process of globalisation. And the United States and Europe, which were major participants in the process of globalisation, are losing their patience for it, they're losing their confidence in free trade. And so this is the trend of our times, I think.
Yeah, that's of course from our perspective, let's say in Europe, it would be also not about having a free trade, but also a fair trade. And we have this kind of discussion about fair trade with China. I think we are moving to the other field. So I would distinguish the free trade and the fair trade. But let us move to our last speaker, Simon. Please, what is your perspective? Because you have both background experience and responsibility in the supply chains around the medical equipment and working for the WHO. So what is this your take on supply chains after pandemics and after last pandemics and maybe for the next pandemics coming?
Thank you. I think my colleagues have dealt with the bigger picture, so I would like to narrow it a bit to the country levels of in terms of the challenges or what the challenges during the pandemic and what to prepare for future ones. So during this the pandemic, what we noticed was there were a lot of bureaucracy in terms of government agencies, in terms of approval and regulations. So for instance, if a vaccine is coming and they need maybe a tax exemption process or document, some of these government really delay the process. Some of them will actually say the goods or the vaccines should arrive before they process this documentation or authorization. Meanwhile, under normal circumstances, this is supposed to be done before. But most countries want the vaccine to be in the country before these authorizations are being given. So this is and that delays, because as soon as these vaccines are delivered and the processes began, it goes back and forth because of the bureaucracies, and it delays the process. So people who are supposed to have access to these vaccines get delayed, So this is one kind of one disruption in terms of this chain. And then another one too is some of these countries don't even have the facilities to store these vaccines. So there were some of the countries that have actually been in during this pandemic. We had a situation where the vaccines arrived and we have to go and look for a private sector storage facility to keep these vaccines. So these are rare challenges. And the last but not the least is also human resource. And some of these countries also don't have the human resource to manage these supplies and vaccines. So it's really a big challenge. And I think going forward and in our effort to prepare, we must be able to focus more on regional integration issues and also try to make sure that the capacity. So even if we have, let's say, a regional cooperation and you don't have the capacity within the country, then the regional can support. So looking at something like Europe, like the model Europe is having, everything can be centralized. But most of these countries don't have the regional cooperation, and within the country too, they don't have the capability. So I think it's a challenge that we must be able to build and prepare towards the future. As Dave said, this could happen next time. Yeah, because it's bound to happen. We don't know yet. Even though WHO has a team that is really reviewing to try to foresee or predict the next pandemic, but it will happen anytime, and we must be prepared to do that. Yeah. So these are my initiatives.
So isn't it fascinating, because 6 years ago, 10 years ago, we wouldn't basically factor this kind of pandemics in our business models, and now every major business needs to basically think in terms of next pandemics, like a next crisis. So this kind of health has become not only the factor of development, but also a factor in business. And I think that's also a major shift in thinking. I would like to maybe come back to what David said about the shift in thinking and the shift in how the global trade looks like. Because I agree with you that China is playing a major role in opening up different markets and exploring the, let's say, new way of organizing globalization. But you in Australia, you have experienced a kind of another side of China, also using this trade links and using the supply chains as a way to pressure Australia in the kind of behavior in the security terms, which was not consistent with the, let's say, traditional way of Australian strategy. And so, what is your take about how you ended up first in the place of the kind of trade war with China, and second part of the question, how you basically went out of this war? Because I think both cases are very instructive.
I mean, this is the risk of dealing with any big power. The big powers can throw their weight around. And so when they're not happy, a big power can use economic coercion as well as other forms of coercion. And so yes, I think Australia, South Korea, even tiny Lithuania in Europe, there are a few examples in recent years of where China is beginning to throw its weight around. It's beginning to show when it has displeasure with a partner, with a partner that it believes is a long-term strategic partner. But when that partner does something that makes China unhappy, the Chinese government has demonstrated to us now that it will, just like the United States does, or that other major powers traditionally have as well, it will throw its weight around. It will use forms of coercion to try and change a policy position. Now, in the case of Australia, Australia had a government a few years ago that in the period of the first Trump presidency in the United States, the Australian government at the time was politically aligned with the Republicans in the US and made a number of policy decisions that on their own, individually, perhaps would not have created so much of an impact on the trading or the bilateral relationship. But Australia made a decision to implement a very comprehensive foreign interference law, which many countries have. Georgia in the Caucasus region has tried to introduce a foreign interference law in recent times with massive protests. But in the case of Australia, the Australian government at the time introduced this foreign interference legislation and turned it into a political theatre. So they made it about China. They claimed that China was interfering in Australian domestic politics, made lots of public claims, no public evidence of any of this, by the way, and there have been many studies since to demonstrate there wasn't much to it, but there could have been, and there could yet be. I mean, there could yet be the opportunity for a foreign power to interfere in Australia, just as in any country. And so having the legislation made good sense, but it was turned into political theatre against China. Equally, there were some discussions about the huge market for international education in Australia. Australia has hundreds of thousands of Chinese students, and there were a couple of cases, 2 or 3 cases, in which students had complained about maps having Taiwan as not included as part of the People's Republic of China. A couple of incidents like this, minor things, but again, they were turned into massive political theatre in Australia. And finally, after a series of these things, a member of parliament was raided by the police, and there were claims that he was involved in a WeChat group. I mean, goodness, that would be terrible, wouldn't it, if you were involved in a WeChat group? Most people who deal with China are on WeChat groups. So there was this massive political theatre about China, which appeared to those of us outside, I was outside of Australia at the time, it appeared like Australia was just trying to please President Trump, who had indicated at the time that he was very unhappy with Australia. So there were lots of attempts, it appeared, to please Trump. And then finally, at the height of COVID, the Australian government makes a highly politicised theatrical argument that there should be an independent inquiry into the origins of the coronavirus, and there should be UN weapons inspector powers given to World Health Organization or independent people to go in and to study the origins of the virus. So in other words, again, the Trump line, essentially ascribing blame, which is a very common thing to do in terms of a health crisis, that we tend to look for someone to blame, and Australia was able to play that role very well. It's got a lot of international media coverage. It was perceived, I think, in China, from the people I've talked to in China, it was perceived, as you would imagine, with quite a bit of anger, because Australia is a very rich country because of its economic relationship with China. So the Chinese considered that their old friend, their old economic partner for 30 years, Australia, remember, had been the #1 destination for Chinese investment for 20 years, from the 1980s. For the next 20 years, Australia was the #1 investment destination for the Chinese. So for Australia to be talking in this very anti-China way was created anger in China. So what did China do? Well, they blocked about $1 billion worth of trade, which was only a very small proportion of the trade with Australia, but even so, it was a targeted attempt to punish Australia for, my apologies, it was actually $20 billion. The actual real net impact was $1 billion, but actually it was $20 billion worth of trade. Australia has a very successfully diversified trading capacity, even though it's very much interdependent with China. Most of Australia's exports just shifted from China to other markets, to other places in the world. So it didn't affect most exporters, but it had about a $1 billion impact on Australia. Did it affect the policy?
Agriculture.
Yeah, so the biggest impact was in my home state of Tasmania on the rock lobster industry, and so that was quite a significant impact. And on the wine industry, there was some impact as well. But did it have an impact? Did China win by using this economic coercion? Well, it didn't change any policy position of the Australian government. But one thing that did happen was that government that created all that political theatre about China, they lost office. And they lost all of their seats that had a large number of Chinese Australians in them, because Chinese Australians and most Australians didn't want to create this anger against China, because Australia has such a close people-to-people relationship and economic relationship with China. So that government lost office. The new government came in and stopped all the political theatre. The new government talks in a more moderate way, and all of those restrictions have now been lifted.
So I understand this as a way of, skillful diplomacy. That's the point number one. But point number two, with the 2 points, Trump 2.0, a humble prediction for the elections in 2025. And I understand that we have another potential, let's say, round of tensions coming if there is a shift in government, because you have elections in May 2025.
That's right. I mean, and it's very interesting, isn't it, the combination of politics with economics here? Because if you're a trader, like the companies that I work with who are doing business between Australia and China, you just want to do business, right? You want to create jobs, you want to create prosperity. But at the political level, sometimes the decisions are made, but there will be some political benefit, some international relations benefit from creating some political theatre around these issues. The very interesting question here is, can countries like Australia and like most countries in the world that now have a significant interdependence with the Chinese economy, could we, even if we wanted to become less interdependent with China, could we do so? I mean, China now is buying 50% of the world's imports. So, China is the driving centre of the world economy. Now, let's hope that other economies continue to grow, including this one here in Bangladesh and India and Indonesia and others. Let's hope that there's a more diversified world in the future. But for now, I think the reality is we actually have to find a way to manage this relationship with China without all the political theatre. That's the challenge for governments, I think.
So let's just switch to Mr. Mamun Rashid. So we heard a lot about Australian experience with China and being an open liberal economy. With this experience of Australia and other countries, do you think that it's a way forward for Bangladesh to enter international trade agreements, as for example, this comprehensive partnership with ASEAN and China? Do you think it's a way forward for Bangladesh?
So many times we have heard about one single animal called China, isn't it? So now when you talk of China, it is not between China and Australia only, and David had also mentioned about the new emerging possible scenario between China and US, the Trump and Mr. Xi Jinping. And when we talk of China, we do talk of safety, security, or championing each other's interest in South China Sea, also Bay of Bengal and Indian Ocean. When we are talking of emerging trade between Africa and China, we have seen how Chinese even foreign policy, one belt, one road policy is also impacting, belt and road policy also impacting the entire gamut of relationship with Africa, and how the defaulting entities, what David has mentioned in his earlier version of the global supply chain disruption, and we have seen how why China wants to command all possible supply chain between Africa and China, and that is why we see the China trying to command the shipping routes or shipping ports in Myanmar and Bentota port in Sri Lanka, even their tension in and around their Garcia presence in the Indian Ocean by US ships. So this is the name of the game. And as long as, and with growing inter-Asian trade also, trade between Bangladesh, India, Bangladesh, China, Bangladesh, South Korea, Bangladesh, Indonesia for trade, even using Singapore port for transshipment, that has become because the port capacity in Chittagong and Mongla does not come much here, because of the depth of the port or the harbour, depth of the harbour availability. So, but what you have asked me is that yes, Bangladesh is with this almost $100 billion worth of trade, Bangladesh is increasingly emerging as a kind of a strong trading country, and their availability, timely availability, shorter lag period, gestation period, timely supply. So we have seen that is where again geopolitics is coming. Where after the July revolution, you all may be aware of it. What do you mean by July revolution or uprise? So we have seen while we are planning for our renewed model for trade, cross-border trade, we cannot ignore India. So that is because even if you import from Shanghai, being the supply, China being the supply to the rest of the world, it takes 16 days of shipment period. Where from Eastern India, it is 2-3 days, and from Western India, it is 4 to 5 or 6 days. So where to get your say onion or pulses or raw sugar or salt or even chilies from? So during any crisis, any drought, any natural calamity or any demand supply shortage. So that is why while people are talking of new kind of economic order, delineating new economic relationship pattern, even with your neighbor, like neighbors are like the parents, you cannot change them, you know. So whether take it or leave it, we must get into a new kind of relationship order with our neighbor in India, because India being so big and India being a continuous supplier in crisis during COVID days, we have seen Simon. You were particularly referring to Africa experience. During COVID days, we have seen during that year, though China is our biggest trade partner, especially we import the highest from China, but India came up as the number one during COVID time because of the proximity, because of the neighborhood export, because of the trucking, usage of trucking through the Petropol and Banapol border. So while we are, to answer your question, that yes, while we are reviewing our relationship with the neighbors, with the emerging large trading partners like US, European Union, Far East, like and China, South China Sea, banking countries like China, South Korea, Taiwan, Japan for some of the quality goods, quality imports. So we are also reviewing our relationship and our position in WTO, the GATT, GATT, as well as UNCTAD, and more importantly, Professor Yunus has requested for revitalizing SAARC, South Asian Association of Regional Cooperation, and thereby review our possible increase of trade with Pakistan also. And you know, while we are talking, just day before, the first, after many years, first Pakistani ship berthed at Chittagong port, and there was newspaper headlines what goods or commodities that ship was carrying. Of course, the ship was not carrying any arms or any ammunition or any military inputs. And also we are reviewing our stronger position in the RCP, China-led trade bloc and few other trade bloc, and also we are awaiting while Poland is becoming likely to be elected, and every likelihood is there to become the European Union head. So how Poland will lead it, and how do we, through Poland, and in enhancing our relationship with Poland, how do we make sure that more of made in Bangladesh commodities are being sold smoothly, transported smoothly to European Union, and vice versa. How do we import cheap quality goods from Europe also uninterruptedly? And last but not the least, once again, and whoever has mentioned whatever in this forum, that geopolitics is becoming extremely important, and that is why we are talking so much of China, Australia, China, South Korea, China, Taiwan, China, Africa, China, Bangladesh, China, and of course, China, US, and from January 25 onwards, that this term 2.0 will come up more prominently in delineating a new economic or trade order for the rest of the world. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for bringing in the so many important issues and importance of cooperation also in the neighborhood with India and Pakistan. I find it really fascinating how Bangladesh was able also to have a steady relationship with India and also improve its relationship with Pakistan. I think it's crucial and it's a major achievement of itself. But thank you very much also for bringing the perspective of the EU and the coming Polish presidency of the bloc. And I just note for myself that the opening up for Bangladesh trade with the bloc. Yes, I'm from Poland. Yeah, and I'm not, but I will just try to also understand the position of Bangladesh better. And I understand after 2026, when Bangladesh would not be LDC anymore, that it is important that for the continuous development of the country to have this trade agreements in place as it is now, and do not lose this kind of trade deals with which are now especially for the LDC countries. So I think it's important that we have a steady set of rules for trading between the bloc and Bangladesh, and that's what I'm taking from our conversation. And just I will ask the last question to Simon, but that will be the last question of mine, and you will have the opportunity to ask questions to the speakers. So please prepare your questions if you have any. We've talked briefly about the role of the EU and the still largest trading bloc in the in the world, the more coherent, and its possible role here in in the global south, spanning from Africa to Southeastern Asia. What would be your advice to the EU and the role it can play, especially in your field in the supply chains and pandemic preparedness for the next health crisis?
Okay, thank you very much. Before I start this, yesterday there was a news from the European Union Commissioner that there was a blackmail by Russia to Austria by blocking the gas supplies to the energy supply, especially this winter. There was a blockage, like they stopped the supply of gas. So this is something that I think Africa has the capacity to supply gas. So for instance, Nigeria has produced the largest gas in Africa, and this is something that the European Union could capitalize on and build that kind of partnership with Nigeria in terms of gas, because she tweeted that they have full storage of gas to power during this winter. But the thing is, just beneath southern of the continent has a potential to be able to do that, because with these Russian sanctions and all that. So this is just by the way. I think so. The only thing that I would suggest to the European Union in terms of this is to be able to build partnership, partnership. And it should be mutual partnership where knowledge, information, and top-notch intelligence can be shared within Africa and then the Southeast Asian countries, so that everybody will be at par in terms of information and this intelligence. And also, if possible, probably some of these Southeast Asian countries and the African countries can be non-permanent members of the NATO, so that some of this information or intelligence sharing will be more kind of coherent, Yeah. So these are areas that the European Union could partner or improve upon with Southeast Asia and Africa.
So I'm taking two big words from what you just said. It's just partnership in information and partnership in knowledge sharing.
Yeah.
I think they are extremely important. So I would like to ask now the audience if you have any questions. we can take 3 of them, and then I would ask our speakers to answer them jointly. But please do indicate to whom your question is asked. So please, and there is a microphone. You need to stand up and speak to the microphone.
Well, I think that this is one of the biggest challenges, supply chain. And whether, as David mentioned, that perhaps there was not much of an impact, given the kind of study you mentioned by the ICC. But the fact remains that there were disruptions. And disruptions were everywhere, all across during the pandemic, and as a result of the current war. Also, not one war, but the 2 wars. And those disruptions, we see what happened in the Red Sea, the transport linkages, everything has come into a major. So we have to always continue to factor and try to create some kind of local capacities in a regional, sub-regional formats, as has been mentioned earlier. You mentioned about India-China briefly, so I would just like to correct. It was not by choice that we tried to do stop the certain equipments and others. Actually, when the pandemic happened, India was not manufacturing any vaccines, number one. It was also not manufacturing any equipment or masks or others. We were importing huge quantities of masks from China. In the meantime, we also had a problem at the border with China. And therefore, you had to recalibrate. Despite all that, today, China is our 2nd largest trading partner with 130 billion unprecedented trade with the country. So we have dependencies and we have to acknowledge that. At the same time, India is trying to do its Make in India campaign in a very big way. And during the pandemic, that's an opportunity for many countries. India emerged not only as a created its first vaccine, but provided to 100 plus countries in the world with the vaccines. With neighborhood first policy, of course, Bangladesh and other countries, Africa, everywhere we supply. 150 countries we supply all the medical, including to the US, to Australia, to all the countries which needed. So that is very much a part of it. But when we have the conflicts, there are certain problems.
Thank you very much
Professor
for your
Rashid, I
comment.
have a small question.
Professor
Rashid.
Yeah, please.
You know, Professor, you of course mentioned about the alternates that are taking place for Bangladesh now. Now, how do you create a local capacity increases within the country so that your trade basket increases?
Thank you very much for this question. We can have 2 ones. So yes, the gentleman and the gentleman behind you afterwards, and that would be our last question. Please.
Okay, great silence. It's unlikely that to bring up the elephant in the room, which hasn't really been mentioned. But if we look at it, you've mentioned 2 instances of disruption. This is pandemic and it's Ukraine war. What about Gaza and Lebanon? Now, I mean, the rules-based order is facilitating and enabling genocide and ethnic cleansing in Palestine. It is enabling and facilitating the unprovoked full-scale invasion of Israel of Lebanon. And this is having a massive impact. I mean, not only on Israel, one of their ports is already bankrupt. The Suez Canal has a fraction of the traffic. I mean, the Houthis have selectively blocked off the Red Sea. And you seem to have Netanyahu wanting to go to war against Iran. And if he does, at some stage the US will have to come in to save his scrawny backside because he will be absolutely defeated and humiliated. So, using this scenario, if Netanyahu gets his wish and there's a war with Iran, what are your predictions in terms of supply chain disruption that will follow from that?
And to whom is the question?
Hello everyone, this is Ashwin Pradesha. I am pursuing my postgraduate degree at the University of Dhaka. How the rebels have been bombing over ships in Yemen, in the Red Sea. They have been portraying it as a revenge in response to Israel's atrocities in Gaza. But due to the intensifying bombing over ships, the transportation of ships from Europe or West to East Asia have been facing such problematic situations. So amidst the reality, will the world be able to manage another alternative route to have a free transportation of ships?
Thank you much for this three questions. So I will just briefly repeat them. First is about to Professor Mamoon about the local capacity building and entering also the global market. The second is about the Middle East crisis and how to respond to them. And the second is also about more specifically about shipping through the Red Sea. So let us maybe take these questions in reverse order, and then we will start with Simon, with you, and that would be also your closing remarks.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so the war with Iran, I hope it doesn't happen because then it's going to have a lot of impact, and also especially fragile countries that do not have these capacities and all this. It's really going to have a bigger impact. And the impact will be more than what Ukraine is having with Russia. So I hope nothing happens in that one. Also, possible effect could be there will be kind of global inflation because the disruption will really be more impacted. So I hope that doesn't happen. I'm not sure the one about the shipping.
It was also about the impact of the bombing of the ships coming through the Suez Canal and Red Sea, and how it could be how the trade can be impacted, and what are the alternative routes, remedies for the crisis.
That would be so probably the distraction will be more. So in terms of lead times will be more. So it may mean you have to go through behind South Africa and go around, or vice versa. So that is the only way that one. So meaning there will be more disruption in terms of the supply chain disruption. So that is the main effect that will have. And then I think that's all right.
Yeah. So David,
I think I'll just make a closing remark that all of these conflicts that we're seeing at the moment, these tragic conflicts and the potential for other conflicts as symptoms of this shifting world order, I think do mean that we inevitably have to look at diversifying our supply chains. We cannot be as reliant as we were in that era of globalization on narrow and vulnerable individual supply chains for products. So there is going to be a shift to duplication, to diversification, which is going to rise. It's going to push costs up. So we're going to see inflation as a result of that. And we're also seeing, and we're already seeing, this massive investment, as was mentioned, in new ports and new supply routes. So part of this shift that we're seeing in world order is going to shake out in a diversification of trade routes as well. But that's a long-term project, but it's one definitely worth watching because it's highly relevant for all of us.
And the last word of the session is for you, and our question from the Indian neighbor.
Thank you so much. Yes, again we are concluding geopolitics, war, shipping costs going up. We have already mentioned that yes, Israel attacking Iran, using the Jordan route, Red Sea tension, Suez Canal tension, delayed shipment, increasing shipment cost and others. With regard to Bangladesh, yes, of course, whether we like it or not, we need to very well diversify our sourcing. So we must draw a balance between our large sourcing destinations or the origins like India, China, Japan, Taiwan, South Korea, and also on the halal food side of it, Malaysia and others. And so we are trying to, but it is like the Bangladesh's position with the apparel supply chain, it is not so easy to replace someone overnight. So we are thinking in the right direction. How do we because shipping cost, ship availability, and drawing a new balance between cargo carrier as well as bulk carrier ships, and bulk carrier ships have got tremendous kind of dependence on the China demand supply gap or management. But having said so, we are gradually shifting. We are reviewing our position, like our reviewing our position in the global trade blocks. Also, how to handle our imports from largely from China and India, and also few other sourcing countries. Their availability of right kind of raw materials, right kind of capital machinery, and the more importantly the shipment cost as well as bargaining cost in some of the local ports. These are also becoming important. Thank you so much.
So thank you very much for bringing this very important notes. And for me, I take from our discussion three major points. First is being we live in a time of turmoil and a global shift, and the answer to this global shift would be diversification, maybe the risking, but also building internal capacity and also improving infrastructure, because it would allow for more partnerships around the world. So thank you very much for all of you, for the speakers, for the wonderful remarks, and thank you for you, the public, that join me in giving a big hand to our speakers. I'm sorry, I need to say something more. And I wanted to just you to give the big hand to our hosts and Mr. Zilur Rahman, my dear friend, and the whole team preparing this wonderful event.
So, thank you to our wonderful speakers for your valuable insights, and thank you everyone who participated in today's session. So I want to request the speakers to come forward for a group photo.